Welcome, welcome. I'm very sorry to say that I was going to kick off the session by showing off my cat, but she ran off as cats do right before the start of the session. So you just got me. You just got me and Jess, and I think that should be plenty. Okay. Jess, can you fill the void of my cat? That's the most important question.
Absolutely. Gladly.
Love it. I almost think we just did a leadership offsite actually, and we themed it like 90s theme. I kind of feel like what if we do every webinar has a theme like cat theme, dog theme? Everybody's got to come with like a little costume, little makeup, maybe? Just
Oh my
me?
gosh, I love it. I love the idea of me in my apartment in New York City dressed as a cat waiting for a HR webinar. There's nothing that's more on brand.
It would be amazing. Do you have pets, by the way?
Yeah, I've got a gigantic Norwegian forest cat called Frodo.
What? What? Oh my gosh. Okay. Before the end, while you're talking, I'm going to step away and grab my cat who is here. He's a Siberian, but he kind of looks a little Norwegian. You know what I mean? It's going to be great. We're going to see some cats on this webinar.
Oh
It's
my
going to be
gosh.
hello all, welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you are new, my name is Melanie Naranjo. I head up the people team here at Athena. We are a compliance training company. We do everything from harassment prevention to cybersecurity, hotline and case management, all the stuff. And we like to take time to bring HR communities together because we know how critical it is for us to have somebody to lean on, both during the good times and the bad. And so with that said, we are bringing everyone together today to talk about a topic that I think has been coming up quite a bit. Just I don't know, have you seen? There was like this viral article actually that came out like right after we put out this webinar. It wasn't. I'm not saying it was causal. Okay, it was a coincidence. Okay, but there was like this.
Absolutely.
There's this viral article that came out. I think it was it the New York Times, and they were saying like, here's everything that's wrong with HR, and like HR is unhappy with HR. Did you see that?
I feel like this has been a thing that like once a year, some big publication will basically publish a story about how HR is the like either completely broken and can't be repaired or is like not worth anything. I'm like, every year it still gets readership. Okay,
Oh, it sort of
get
feels
that
like
bag.
100%. Like what's happening? Like, why are we still having this conversation? And so I wanted to make sure that we took some time to actually talk about it in like a solution oriented way. Cause I think sometimes when people talk about it, it's just like, let's be real, it's like shit talking and it's like venting, which sometimes is needed, but like it's not really like, okay, so what are we gonna do about it? What actually do you think is the problem? How do we fix it? What are we gonna, what are we trying to achieve here? And so hopefully today's space gives us a little bit of opportunity for venting, releasing that stress, and then also talking about what are we going to do about it. And also, by the way, like anyone in the comments, feel free to disagree with this statement, right? Like HR is not broken. What are you all talking about? Like we want all the conversations and discussions. So with that said, let's do a quick sort of like context setting, intros, agenda, and then we will kick it off. I'm excited for a really candid, open, and productive discussion. All for anyone who doesn't know how anyone who's new to one of these webinars, know that they're very interactive. So I'm going to be interacting with you all in the comments. We'll be asking questions. Please use the comments. If you don't want to be called on, put an asterisk next to your response when you answer, and that will be my cue to not call on you. I don't want the fear of being called on to be a deterrent to you participating. And then everyone, please be respectful in this, safe space where HR people are just being honest and vulnerable. Okay, with that said, I want to introduce Jess. So Jess, I honestly can't, I'm not sure how I met you anymore because we've had so many different overlaps. I think like you spoke at a live event that we hosted a couple years back. I met you through Troop HR. I've sat through some of the events that you facilitated. And all I can say is you are amazing. You are so smart. You've written this incredible book that we're going to talk about in the context of this topic later on in the session. And I could not possibly do you justice in trying to introduce you. So what I will say is everyone, Jess is amazing. If you're not already following her on LinkedIn, you. Jess, can you please tell us just a little bit about yourself? Who are you? How'd you get to where you are today? What should the audience know about you?
I feel like that introduction could have been my introduction for you as well, Melanie. Except feel like the book thing, it TBC, it's to come, right? Like it's to be produced. I
We
trust you on
shall
that.
see. Oh no,
We shall
it
see.
sounded real stressful.
Um, yeah, thank you so much. So my name is Jess. You can call me Jessie, Jessica, Jessie, I don't mind. I am the CEO of a company called Talentful. We are also selling services into the HR space, but we sell recruitment, essentially an RPO primarily for tech businesses. So like really supporting you on hyperscale. Prior to that, I've been the COO of a company called Whereby, which is a very kind of classic API SaaS business. So a big shift away from that into something that's a little bit more in my zone. Melanie's right. I have written a book which is all about people operations, and I'm sure we'll talk a bit about it. But otherwise, I'm just so excited to chat. I feel like this topic, I love that it's a little titillating. I love that it's a little controversial. And I feel like it's going to make for a really fun and interesting discussion between the two of us.
I think so. I like to keep it a little spicy, balanced, empathetic, seeing all sides, but spicy.
Hmm.
Okay, well, let's kick it off, everyone. For today's agenda, we're going to talk about common HR challenges. We're going to talk about new ways of working. I'm really excited to dig in to this with you, Jess. And then we'll do a quick Athena spotlight as always, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. You all have sent some pretty interesting questions in advance, so we'll do some of those. And then any questions that come up throughout the chat, please drop them in the Q&A box. If you drop them in the general comments, like webinar chat, I will probably miss them. So put them in the Q&A box, por favor. Okay, with that said, let's get into it. I always like to start with a little pulse check questions. So get your fingers ready for the comments. On a scale of 1 to 5, everyone, 5 being super agree with the following statement, 1 being don't agree at all. Every people initiative I've ever rolled out has always been a huge success. So 5 is, yup, never had any issues. 1 being, how do you even HR? Like, how can you HR effectively? Okay, look at all I always love. Okay, so Jess, this is like one of my
It's
favorite. Yeah, this is one of my favorite things about the webinars, like trying to see trends, trying to see how people are answering, see how engaged everyone is in the question. Sometimes people don't answer the questions because it was a bad question. So, it's good for me to know. So I'm really seeing an interesting mix of responses. Before I call on anyone, I'm just curious to know, like, what is your reaction seeing the spread of responses? Like, does this line up with what you would have expected to see?
Yeah, I think so. I put in my answer was a 2.
Okay.
And the reason I put a 2
Yeah,
is
yeah.
because I think probably, hopefully similar to what a lot of other justifications here is, like, sometimes you just launch things that don't work. But the reason I'm not going to go for a 1 is because I actually feel like the process of learning and iterating is so valuable that it's okay to be humbled by your lack of success on something that you attempted. Um, but I think, well, we're going to talk a little bit about the size and scale of delivering stuff, but I feel like sometimes maybe the answers that are 1s or 5s are people that are really good at deciding what size they're going to launch something first before investing a lot of time and energy. But anyway, that's my take.
Oh, that's fascinating. Okay, let's call in someone from the audience because I always like to hear from people on both extremes. So let's call in Jessica Baker, Jassica Baker. If you could unmute yourself, and if there's technical issues, no worries, we'll move on to the next person. But if you could unmute yourself, tell me about why you said a 1 for this one. Like, why do you feel that you haven't been able to roll out huge successes? What makes you say that it's a 1 for you? Okay, I'm gonna assume technical difficulty, so I'll call on one other person in the meantime, and then Jessica, if your thing works afterwards, feel free to unmute yourself. Let's do Rosalie Scott Heron. You also gave a 1, Rosalie RO.
Oh, I think people can't unmute themselves.
Is that true? Uh,
Everyone's like, it's true.
oh, interesting. So I think that Ace is giving you unmute access. Rosalie, are you able to unmute yourself? If the answer is no, we will just move on.
Can you hear me?
They're
Yes.
right in there. Ace has got it.
Great.
Okay, perfect. Okay, yes, the general chat will not have unmute access. It's just people that I call on. Ace is working tirelessly behind the scenes. Rosalie, thank you for sharing with the team. Can you give a little bit more about why your answer was a 1? Tell me about some of the struggles that you've had with rolling out people initiatives.
And so maybe you have not, I work as a business partner, so some of the initiatives are not necessarily your own, but you're asked to be a part of it. So sometimes the fact that we never involve all the stakeholders in it before, so we just came up with this and then we're saying, roll this out without getting the input from stakeholders. I think that's extremely important when we're rolling out the initiatives. and also to it's a change management. And I always say to my folks, people are not against change, but they're against the ambiguity of change, and that's what makes it challenging. So I said the change management is a big part of why some of our initiatives have not been successful. So I think it's important really to know, is this really what the organization wants? So it's and I talk a lot about how data supports and how stories inspire. So it's having a combination of those. Are we doing it because someone has a gut feeling, or do we have data to support this? And is this what the business really wants? So those are some of the things I think that would have, in retrospect, would have made these initiatives much more successful.
I think that is so smart and astute. Rosalie, thank you so much for sharing. Can I get a +1 in the comments from anyone else who feels like, wait, we were like trying to do a thing that like nobody even wanted. Like we didn't even take a step back to assess, like, is this the thing worth spending our time on that we even had alignment on? Okay, yeah, seeing a lot of seeing +100, +1111111. Yeah, I see this all the time. I'm gonna stop screen sharing for a quick second so we can be just a little bit more intimate here. Jess, I'm curious to know, when you hear this from Rosalie and seeing all the +1s in the comments, do you agree with this? Do you see this as a common issue in the world of HR? How often are people working on things that they shouldn't even be working on, or they don't even know why they're working on it?
Oh my goodness. This is like, wow. I feel like you and I have had some good conversations about the kind of approach that I take generally is, so I have this very strong opinion that you should run your HR team very similarly to how your team runs like your product and engineering teams, developing your products for your consumers. Because ultimately, especially in today's world where people have so much choice and there's such a beautiful marketplace of different options for them as employers, it is really like a purchasing decision that people are kind of subscribing to every month, and you're responsible for making this incredible experience for them. And I think one of the things that that new reality has kind of meant for us as HR leaders, people leaders, business leaders, is that we have to be crafting an experience that's very customer aligned, so employee aligned. What is it not only that we want to get out strategically of having the kind of right people subscribe to our culture, our product, and by right, I obviously don't mean any kind of protected characteristics. I mean people that are really going to thrive in your team, but also being very participatory in your like user research and understanding what problems you're trying to solve. And that was just a thing that wasn't really front and center in people in HR, when I started my career. So things have really changed, and I think this has become more important than ever.
I always, to your point, because I hear this all the time from HR professionals where they're like, wait, like I want like I want to make sure that you all are on the same page with me, but not like from a protected class sort of. I always say, culture add, but values alignment. So like I'm not
Yeah.
looking for diversity of values. I'm looking for alignment on values, but I very much want diversity of culture and like thought processes and perspectives. So I'm with you all the way that like at the end of the day, you still need to be aligned on like who you are as a company and what kind of people it's going to take to get you there. I'm curious to know, let's zoom out for a quick second. So we called this webinar something real spicy, which is HR is broken. Okay. And we were just talking about, some things, some areas where sometimes we maybe go wrong. Ultimately, do you agree or disagree with this statement? Like what goes to your mind when somebody says HR is broken?
So I think my first initial gut reaction is like, this feels like, especially if I read it in like a Forbes or, like a New York Times or something like that, it feels like a little bit of a cheap clickbait trick. And I'm not saying that's what we're doing, but I do think it's an interesting, like, I think I kind of see this as like, we're kind of poking fun at that cheap trick a little, right? Like we are kind of looking at it as HR people and saying like, okay, if this is what you're going to say, this is how we feel about it. But I do think that HR has changed so much over the course of the last 15, 20 years that it's bent out of shape a little and it feels uncomfortable. And I think it's hurting us and it's hurting our teams. And I think that especially if people if people outside of HR, like journalists, not speaking to anyone, speaking to a VP sales saying HR is broken, I kind of am a little bit like, well, you don't really know what it takes to run this part of the company and what's changed over the years. But if someone in HR says to me, like, I feel like it's broken, I absolutely empathize with that because I do genuinely believe like so much has changed. The job has shifted so significantly. and some places for the good and some places not so much.
Can we dig in there? I'm curious,
Yeah.
and I love the framing that you gave here, right? Which is that, like, first of all, let's put out there that, like, everyone's working so hard, everyone's doing their best, everyone really wants like the best for HR, for our employees, all that stuff. And also, that doesn't mean that there isn't room to improve. Like, there can be two truths, there's space for both of them. And so I'm curious to know from your perspective, Jess, what do you think is holding us back? When you say that things are a little bent out of shape, what are you talking about? Let's get specific here.
Yeah. So I think back to my first ever job. I think I've talked to you about this before. My first job was HR grad in Australia, working for a big mining company, massive corporate, hundreds of thousands of employees. And literally my job was printing letters of offer, 2 copies in like duplicate or triplicate, putting them in an envelope, mailing them to someone's house. They would come back, I'd go down to the mailroom, I'd pick them up, get my HR director to countersign. I would then scan them, email them to myself, and upload them into PeopleSoft. Ugh, nightmare. And I literally remember sitting there on my computer one day and being like, this job is the best job in the world. I'm like, okay, so the reason I bring this up is like, that was what the job was, 15 years ago. And everyone was like, this is incredible. Or at least I was like, this is incredible. But since then, like, even like the idea of like, think about how much HRIS systems have changed. Think about like, we've got DocuSign, we have like, and even that's just the SaaS that supports that process. But that process is actually massively shifted now. Those things happen instantaneously. It's so much more about negotiation and discussion. Again, the marketplace of employers has opened up dramatically since, first of all, remote working massively, but also the really positive push towards women and people of color and underrepresented minorities being able to participate in the workforce more. We have more choice, right? And what that means for HR leaders is our job has changed so far away from that Ulrich model of like kind of shared services, very administrative, very serving the executive position. And rather, we're now becoming like these kind of very almost mini economists in some places, right? The last couple of years, we're really feeling it. And I think SaaS is one thing, tools to help us, but the job has just changed so massively. I think our org structure needs to really like adapt to those changes, and we need to be comfortable with the fact that iterating on something doesn't mean that we are like saying that what we did in the past was wrong. It means that what we're saying in the future is going to be better.
I feel like I'm hearing so many fascinating underlying threads here. I'm hearing, so I'm hearing on the one hand, we need to be able to adapt to changing needs. I'm hearing also, there has been a shift from more tactical approaches to more strategic approaches. And I also feel like I'm hearing sort of like implicit in all of this, a little bit of this, this idea that sometimes, and maybe in the past, we were often in autopilot, right? Like, if you think about your original example of like, okay, I take this and then I put it here and I do that. And like, was that like the most efficient approach? Probably not, right? But like, you did it because that's the way that it was done, right? And so like, what is holding us back from breaking out of autopilot and thinking about, hey, is this the right way to do this? How do we shift things? Like, do we shift things? I'm curious to know, from your perspective, you wrote a really fascinating book about this, and we're going to get into that in a second because you really thought about like, how do we reimagine the approach to HR? I'm curious to know, what were some of the stories along your journey that got you there? Like, what are some of the fails that you had? I think that's helpful always, right? Because people then like feel a little bit like I'm not alone. But what are some of the mistakes that you made along the way? And I'll give an example to kick it off in case that helps, which is
Yeah.
like, I see very often a couple of things. One, in fact, if anything that I say resonates with anyone in the audience, can you please give me a +1 in the comments at any point that I say something resonates
Me
with you?
too, me too. I want the little hearts as well.
Yeah.
I love them flying up.
Yes, we live off of the engagement here.
Oh, I love
So
the hearts.
yes. Okay. So first example that I see all the time is, hey, managers are struggling. They need more support. So we're going to roll out management training. But then we roll out management training because everyone told us they wanted management training, but then no one shows up to the training, or they show up and they're texting or emailing the whole time. And the issue is, well, they say, well, I wanted training, but I don't have time to do this training. Okay. Scaling a lot of +1s. I see other examples where, for example, it's like the employees want more engagement engagement activities. They want you to host more events for them. But then every event you host, there's like a reason why it's not a good event. So, the cheese making class is exclusive to vegans. I'm not making fun of vegans. I'm vegan, so it's great.
I'm also vegan too, so we're fine with that.
Yeah, it's okay. We can make fun of
22 years strong, babe.
Yes. Oh my gosh, you've got me. I'm at 18.
This is a different webinar.
Gosh, okay, back on track. Or it's like, sometimes I see you like you talk it, you get buy-in from the leadership team and you say like, hey, I'm gonna roll out this initiative. Any concerns? And they're like, no, it's fine. And then the day before you roll it out, they're like, wait, we're doing what? What? No, now's not a good time. Why are you doing this? When did this happen? Yeah, okay. So I get this all the time. And often the response is sort of like, so it's not working. We can't do anything right. I'm curious to know, just what are some of the fails that you've made and how did that then foster new ideas of how to approach HR more effectively?
Yes. I feel like I'm almost in my therapist's office right now because I'm looking back on little 21-year-old Jess and just feeling so much empathy and love for her. But I think there are 3 things that really come to mind. And like 3 sounds like a lot, but they're short, I promise. I think the first one is just like you've mentioned, I got into people for the same reason I think a lot of people get into people relations, or at least like my true actually reason for getting into HR is a separate story. But like the reason I stayed in it and loved it and wanted to build a career in it is because I really like people and I want to help them and I want to have interactions with them and I want to work with a lot of people. And I love the kind of anthropological aspect of it. But that also tends to lean towards people that are very like just fulfilling desire orientated. And I mean this in like a kind of the most respectful way that I can possibly say it is like, if someone came to me and said, I have this desire that I want to be fulfilled, I so desperately wanted them to have what they needed. And I've, obviously as I've grown in my career, one of the big things that has really changed for me, and you just hit on the nail on the head with the training example, there's a saying in user research, which is 50% of your customers, 50% of the time your customers have no idea what they want, and 50% of the time they know exactly what they want, and you have to figure out which is which, right? And I think the same is true in HR. Some of the time people come to you and say, I want this, and they actually don't. They want a solution solved that's a different thing, right? And they're just coming to you with what their proposed solution is. And your job is to try and work out, is this someone wanting an outcome genuinely, or is it someone wanting a solution to something else that my job is to figure out what the right solution is? I missed that for a lot of time because I was so desperate to make people feel like they were being heard. But actually, that's actually one of the things that can make people feel the least heard, is just taking their desire and translating it into reality without really understanding what they need and listening to them. So that's the first thing. The second one is, I think it's a little ouchy for some people, and it was definitely ouchy for me. I had convinced myself I was not a numbers person, that I didn't want to look at the numbers. I couldn't do it. I was not a math girly. I hated math. But that's not true. I'm actually really good at math. And I now manage the finance team. But the only thing holding me back from doing that was 2 things. I think it was myself kind of holding this belief that I just wasn't good with numbers. And also, I think a lot of the companies that I was working in had these kind of predisposed ideas about HR that we're sharing in the comments, where there was a symbiotic negative relationship there. They were also holding me back, right? And I needed to be the one to take charge and say, no, I want to be better at this. I want to work this out. And that made a huge shift, because once I started understanding the commercials and the numbers and really getting into it, my world opened in a massive way. And I think the third thing is I like, it's a little embarrassing, but I remember when I was 23 years old in London, like looking at a presentation for someone else's HR strategy deck and basically being like, I have no idea what strategy means. I'm just going to basically copy and paste this deck and make it into my branding and make it look like, just put nice words in that I think make sense. And I think that comes from me not having the right amount of mentors around me, but also honestly, again, that negative symbiosis where I felt like I didn't really know what I was meant to do. I didn't know what strategy meant. I didn't know what data meant. I didn't know how to make this thing all connect. So I just went with like what like the kind of quickest path to solution was, which was copying what someone else did. And that's just not the best way. So those are my 3 massive fails that I think really held me back for a very long time. And when I was able to kind of really look at myself in the mirror and address those things, I was like, I think I was able to make massive shifts in my career.
I don't know if you can tell, but there is so much of what you're saying that the audience that is really resonating with the audience. I, for the audience sake, want to really dig into some specifics here. You wrote this book that basically said, hey, all of these issues and like how do we reframe our approach to HR and how do we look at HR like a product so that we're not just applying like a one size fits all, but actually seeing like who is it that we are as a company, what are we trying to achieve and how do we do it? Can you tell us a little bit more about what your book is about and what you mean in your book when you say, looking at the people team like a product?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think companies are building three products. You're building your consumer facing product. So that is compliance training or recruitment services or whatever raises, if you're Harry's raises. Then you're building your fiscal instrument, which is a financial product that your venture capitalists are buying, your private equity, your shareholders, whoever it is, right? You may be a customer of this product and there is a very genuine product there. And the third product is the employee experience, which is a subscription product. And it is your job as the chief people, VP people, and the people team to be creating a product that both has a real standout in the market and also attracts and retains the people that you believe are strategically going to help you achieve the best outcomes you can as a company. And I think if you start thinking about your kind of HR funnel, like this product funnel, like I'm sure many of you have seen the marketing and product funnels your product teams have built, where you come start from awareness, you kind of end at engagement and upselling and eventually churn. I think it really shifts the relationship you have with the rest of the business. First of all, it kind of addresses that point too I mentioned before. It makes you automatically a little more commercial and invites you a little bit more into those conversations. And it allows you to do what Rosalie was just talking about before, which is really engage in user research and properly talk to your consumers of your subscription product to help make sure that you're really building things that are product market fit or customer market fit and are going to get you the best return on investment.
You gave a phenomenal example of this in action at the Troop HR retreat that we both attended. And I would love to have you share that with the audience today. Can you tell the audience about the PTO problem that you solved using this approach and this strategy?
Yeah. So this is a problem we had at Whereby, my previous business. We were a Scandinavian headquartered business headquartered in Norway. And if any of you have ever worked in Scandinavia, and I know a few of you had, Kelly, I know in the chat definitely has worked with Scandinavian teams. You will know that over summer, basically everyone takes the summer off. Power to them. Amazing. But unfortunately for us, summer was also a really good sales period. So we were really struggling to make sure we're hitting revenue targets over summer because we just had a huge amount of absences over that period of time. And it was causing us real strategic problems as a business. So I got brought this problem statement, which again, really focusing on a problem statement rather than mistakes I've made in the past where I just wanted to, take the solution people gave me and said, how do I get the solution in action as quickly as I can? And I went to my people team, who I again build very much like a product team. They work like a squad. And I said, here's the problem statement. I want to be able to reduce the amount of revenue lost over summer by increasing the amount of resource that we have available over summer. And of course, the caveat to this is always underpinning everything. We are building an experience-based product. So we don't want to build a terrible experience because that's just going to have a very short burn and our customers, our team are going to start churning. So what I want to avoid is what I would consider to be a very traditional HR way to solve this problem, which is kind of wrist slapping. If you don't take your holiday a month in advance or you're booking it over the time of someone else, then we're going to reject your holiday. Imagine if you had that experience from Booking.com and they went back to you and said, actually, 3 other people have come forward and said that they would like to book this hotel room for more money, so we're going to cancel your accommodation. You'd be like, what are you talking about? It's ridiculous. So I said to them, go away and solve this problem and come back with some solutions. So the team went away and did some user research. And in their user research, what they found was there were basically 3 problems that were potentially really limiting them. Problem number 1 is that the team just had no idea how to access the HRIS system. They just, they weren't really using it. They didn't really get it. It was very web app based. And of course, us all in HR, we maybe it's a little hard to empathize with this because I personally spend probably 2 hours a day in Bob, even now in my current role. So I'm sure you all probably spend a lot of time in there. but the team just didn't even know where to log in. So what they were doing was messaging their manager on Slack and saying, hey, I need to book some holiday. How do I do that? And the manager's just like, just send me some dates. They were having a Slack conversation. Everyone was forgetting about it, and no one was checking resourcing. The second thing is that the team honestly just completely were forgetting to make sure they were getting holiday booked in ahead of time. So January, we're all done with like the holiday period, winter holidays that are happening, or summer holidays if you're in where I'm from, down in Australia. And people just weren't focused on booking holidays that part of the year. Like, you're really focused on getting back to work. And the final thing was, we wanted to incentivize behavior rather than disincentivize behavior, right? And give people a reason to consider doing something different. And of course, there was a big background swell into making sure we were recruiting people across broader geographic areas so that we're kind of diluting this issue. But what the team ended up doing was implementing 3 things. First was a very simple little newsletter, and we only did this for 2 years, where in January we kind of went out and said, now's a great time to book holidays, very cheap. This is where some great places to go and book for summer holidays are. So kind of nudging them towards, don't forget, holidays should be booked early if you can. The second thing we did was we implemented a little Slack bot, which allowed people just to book holiday directly into Slack rather than logging into a web app, which meant that they could just /holiday type it in. And the third thing we did was we gave everyone a $250 Booking.com voucher if they booked their holiday, and then took it with at least, I think it was 3 to 6 months in advance. So basically, you get a free extra night's accommodation with your family if you book this ahead of time. And the combination of those 3 efforts, and then of course the additional effort of just recruiting from a broader geographic range, meant this was actually really only an issue for us for a year. And nobody had to get slapped on the wrist. Nobody got in trouble. Everyone was behaving like adults. And I think this is a problem that, like, the traditional way of HR to solving it, yes, the path to completion is very quick, but the path to actual really beautiful solution takes a little longer, but might actually be more elegant.
I think you've touched on something that's just so common and difficult in the HR world, uh, which is this idea that sometimes it's sort of like butting heads. It sort of becomes this like us against them mentality. And there can be, I think, understandably, this sense of like, nobody wants to partner with us. Like, this is a losing battle. And, I'll give the management training example, right? You spend all your time working on putting together this beautiful management training series, and then you finally do it. People don't show up. They show up, but they're not paying attention. And you're like, what the hell? What I love about the way that you broke this down is, one, the user research, right, component, making sure, do you actually understand what the right solution for this is? Is a management training the right solution? And if it is, what does that look like, right? How much time does it take, blah, blah, blah. The second piece that I really love is that it felt truly like a partnership versus this antagonistic relationship, sort of like being angry at the employees and like assuming bad intent. When I think about the management training example, we had this at Athena actually, and our managers really did want to take the training, but they really didn't have time. And I think oftentimes it's easy to sort of say, well, you'd make time if it was that important to you, wouldn't you? Right? Because I've made time for this. But the reality is, if you just do that, it doesn't change anything. We were able to shift things around by basically saying, like, okay, if time is the issue, then we will never take more time. We will only replace, not add time. So we ended up solving the problem by basically saying, okay, if I need you to do a management training, it's going to be 1 hour, then we will cancel the equivalent in alternative meetings to account for it. So we would cancel our all hands meeting, our town hall, and we would replace the town hall with a manager training. So then managers would just use that same time for their manager training, and everybody else got an extra hour, right? And it was this very beautiful, it seemed so simple, but it really solved the underlying issue, which is we actually heard them and we solved for that problem versus continuing to butt heads here. I'm curious to know, very briefly, and then I'll move on, I'll pivot us a little bit. How has this impacted the way that people at your company, whether it be business stakeholders or other employees, how has it impacted their perspectives and relationships with HR at the companies where you've implemented this approach?
I'm going to give this is a pretty vulnerable answer right now. I think my previous role was kind of Greenfield's team, right? I joined when we were 30, 40, and we grew up to like 200 at some point. Talentful, very different situation, a couple hundred already, and it's a very different kind of landscape. whereby it wasn't a difficult transition because it's greenfields and people didn't necessarily have very strong leading indicators of what they believed the HR team should be looking like coming into it. Maybe there was a little bit of preconceived bias, of course, and like, you know, those things absolutely exist. You have to combat them. I think implementing it at a existing company that's already scaled or scaling is a lot harder. And I think one of the things that I found really difficult is actually product kind of focused HR is by its very nature non-parental. It means that you aren't going to be parenting your team. You're building things that they can use to solve their problems, right? But you aren't operating the machinery on their behalf, or at least you shouldn't be to do it effectively. And actually, I think that I underappreciated how much of a shift that was going to be for people. Like, what do you mean people aren't going to come into my probation reviews? What do you mean when you're not going to fill in my forms for me? Like, and I'm not saying they're doing that from a place of expectation, demand, entitlement. It's just that's what they had experienced in the whole period of time at this company. And the people team makes a very big shift to be solving very specific problems instead of operating administrative machinery. And of course, some of our problems are how do we make this administrative machinery easier to run? But actually, I was a little surprised over this last like 8 months how much the shift from a parental work culture to a non-parental work culture, underpinned, of course, by this people as a product methodology, was going to be both something that people deeply desired and a little feared.
Honestly, I'm not surprised by that at all because I think that the further I get into my career, the more I realize that over communication is so critical. Like anytime there's change management, you have to like pause and redefine your ethos, like pause and redefine your people philosophy, for example, right? Like here's how to partner with people. Here's what people is responsible for, and here's what people team is not responsible for. I'm looking at the clock, so I'm gonna move us along here with a pulse check question because I'm gonna put this out to the audience because I think underpinning all of this is really important. It's really important that we acknowledge like the emotional and like stressful side of things, right? It's one thing to talk in theory about like, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could all just apply these, you know, logical theories and make everything work beautifully? And it's another to sort of acknowledge that like sometimes you know, there's nuance and complexity. So I'm going to put this question in the comments and I'll read it aloud. And please, in the comments, put your responses, everyone. On a scale of 1 to 5, how much do you agree with the following statement? 5 being I super agree, 1 being don't agree at all. I'm often too stressed, overworked, frustrated, fill in the blank to put my best foot forward. So like, thank you, Jess, for all this lovely advice. I love, you know, the smart strategy. And also, quite frankly, I don't know that I have the emotional or like workload capacity to actually apply it. Okay. Yeah. We're getting a lot
Breaks
of
my heart.
it's heartbreaking, right? It's so heartbreaking to like see the thing, see the solution, be like, yes, that's the thing I want to do. And also I'm blocked. Like I can't do it. I'm going to call on someone to unmute themselves and share a little bit more about this. Let's call on someone. Okay, Haley Orr, you put like 25s. You can't expect me not to call on you. Haley Orr, Hayley, if you could unmute yourself and tell us a little bit about why this prompt resonated so strongly with you.
Hopefully everyone can hear me.
Yeah.
I think for me, part of it is we're a very small HR department. It's me and one other. And you know, we get bombarded with a lot from all sides. And as soon as it's almost like whack-a-mole, you know, we come up with a solution, we're excited to present it, we've done the work, boom, it's shot down. But hey, why haven't you figured out this problem first? And it's like, oh, okay, well, here's our solution for that. No, that's not going to work either. And it's just like, you know, we're doing what we can. You know, especially this week, we're in like this lengthy battle trying to explain why you can't just make somebody exempt. It's not a right that they earn. So yeah, it's just like there's always a new fire to put out, and you know, we're just getting to the point of, well, you know, please just respect the job that we are here to do. It's not personal. This is human resources. We're just looking out for the best interests of the company and the employees. despite how difficult that can be at times.
Ailey, thank you so much for sharing. I can feel it in the way that you express this, and I don't know if you can see, but you're getting a lot of love from the audience. Yeah, it's a real common feeling. You've put your heart and soul into all these efforts, and it just goes nowhere. Or people agree, and then they change their minds last minute, or they don't take the time to understand the challenges that you are facing, or to properly equip you with the resources necessary to achieve the goals that they are assigning you. Jess, I'm curious because I think anytime we do one of these webinars, I think what makes our webinars unique is that we get the reality of what it feels like to be an HR person, right? Like, it's one thing to talk like, here's how to do it. It's another to acknowledge, like, this is what it feels like to be a day in the life of an HR person. It's not so easy. I'm curious to know from your perspective, Jess, what advice do you have for the many HR professionals who are listening in today, and they agree with you on the surface, and yet they're feeling too bogged down by frustration, work baggage, feeling undervalued to actually make these changes?
So, okay, it's complicated. I think I've got a lot of feelings about this because I think there's also, it depends on the inputs that are driving towards you feeling like this. So if you are sitting there right now, really genuinely feeling like your leader just doesn't respect you or your function, then it's going to be a different answer. I'm not going to go to that extreme. I'm going to say to, this answer, it's like, your leader respects you and they really respect the work that you're doing, but there's something's lost in translation, or something's lost in the structure, or there's, not enough resources funneling towards you, or just generally the company doesn't really have the success right now. It's a tough market that they're unable to genuinely put resources in the back office. And I think all those things are fair. And also those things are really frustrating. Like, both can be true. So I think the first thing is you need to cut yourself a little bit of slack. Like, other teams also aren't perfect, right? Like, brand marketing also cannot calculate the actual outcome of the efforts they're putting into things. We try, absolutely, and that effort is worth something and it means something, but they also can't calculate it perfectly. If I ask my brand marketing team what our CAC payback is on brand efforts, they're giving me a rough estimate, and I know that. You should also make sure that you know that every other team is probably kind of fumbling some things as much as you are from time to time, and that doesn't, I think almost like running a business or being a leader in a business almost sometimes feels a little bit like Instagram. Every team is up there telling you how amazing their life is, #blessed, and you're like, I don't feel #blessed. I feel #cursed right now. I'm so stressed. So just, remember that it's a little like Instagram. I think the other thing as well is, like, if you're genuinely feeling really under pressure, something has to give eventually. And I can tell you right now, if it's not the structure, it's going to be you. So you need to bet on yourself now, because otherwise in a couple months' time, the thing that's going to fail, I'm sorry to say, is going to be you, or it's going to be someone on your team. But something has to give.
There are two things that really stand out to me about your response. One is, I think, just flagging the fact that, yes, this exists everywhere, right? But sometimes it can feel like it's happening more in the HR space, because literally every single employee at the company has an opinion to weigh in on when it comes to HR, right? Because
everyone's a people person.
Everyone's a people person. Everyone can do your job. And also, like, understandably, every decision that HR makes does impact the wide company. Whereas, for example, like if you're talking brand marketing, right? Brand marketing cares about brand marketing, maybe other people on the commercial team, but you might not necessarily hear from like the engineering team about it, right? Or whereas like HR, you're going to hear from everyone. And so it can feel like this overwhelming influx. So I think, one, to just call that out and acknowledge it can be really helpful and validating. But two, I'm going to say, and I think this is like implied here, but if not, whatever, you can tell me, Melanie, that I don't agree with that. I like to just acknowledge that these things are happening, because, to your point, right, something's got to give. It's going to be you, or it's going to be the structure. I'm a big fan of just calling out the thing that's not working. So I'll give a specific example for anyone who's like, Melanie, what are you talking about? Say, for example, every time you propose something, you get buy-in, and then at the last minute, people change their minds. I would just go, right? I know. I think what we have a tendency to do is sort of like be really upset about it, understandably. And then it's sort of like, well, people aren't listening. I'm actually a really big fan of just going right to the CEO and be like, hey, Thank you so much for taking the time. I just want to flag that the last 3 people initiatives I proposed, I got buy-in for, and then at the last minute, everyone changed their mind. So I'm very open here. Can you explain to me why you think that's happening and how could I better avoid that? The reason I like this is because one, it forces the person to acknowledge this like tough thing, right? Like either there is a bias happening or there's something wrong that you're doing that they haven't taken the time to give you feedback about, right? And so now we can talk about it, right? The second is that I think it helps get rid of these like resentment, these feelings of resentment where you're just like spiraling and spinning and you're like, is it me? Is it them? We're not going to talk about it because I'm just going to call it out because I'm not willing to tolerate this anymore. And I've just found that to be so much more helpful than sitting on the thing and not saying it. I'm seeing some agreement here from the audience. Jess, what goes through your mind when I say that? I mean, do you follow this approach? Are there like pros, cons, that, risks to watch out for?
So one of the reasons why I said from the very top, it's so important. Like I can't really give an answer if the person you're working very closely with at the top of your company doesn't have your respect front and center. Like I feel like I have such a respectful and kind relationship with my CEO now, my previous CEO. I feel very like there's definitely been times where I've gone to him and said, I'm really frustrated by this thing, blah, 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 whatever it is. And he's like, I don't have time to hear this today. I'm like, no, you have to hear it. Today is the day. I need you to hear this. And he's like, okay, whoa. And I think without that relationship, I would find it really difficult. I think Jose made a good point in the comment actually, which I was going to call out on the same thing is like HR is kind of like seen as like almost the customer service of the company. I think that's kind of true. But I think within that same headspace, trying to see feedback and participation as genuinely a gift and a blessing from people, but then also being able to go back to senior leaders where you have a good amount of respect and saying like, I'm getting a lot of mixed messages. How am I going to cope with this? You need to have, I think, both an optimistic view of feedback and an open channel for discontent, confusion, where things are bumping into each other.
I think that's spot on. And I will say for anyone in the audience who's listening in and feeling like, well, I don't have that respect, or like, I'm not sure that I do have that respect. And so I'm scared to have the conversation. I'm going to go ahead and double down here and say that if you don't have that respect, it is so much better for you to find that out as soon as possible so that you can make a decision. If you are uncertain whether or not you would be received well if you had a candid conversation, that is more reason to have that conversation, because either the CEO is going to prove you wrong and they're going to say, oh my gosh, I had no idea. Let's talk about this. And now you can move forward together. Or the CEO is going, or whoever you partner with is going to double down, not partner with you. And then you have a decision to make, right? You can decide, one, I want to invest X amount of time to try and fix this. You can decide to, you know what, this is not going to be fixed. This is not fixable. So I'm going to focus on these things that bring me joy within the company. And I'm not going to try here anymore. I'm going to move on because it's a wasted effort and it's draining my energy and it's not for me. Or three, you know what? I need to work at a place where I feel full respect in all of the areas, not where I need to be in my own lane here and find a space and carve out a quiet little space for myself. It's time to explore what other opportunities might be out there for me. And now listen, I want to acknowledge that's coming from a place of privilege, right? You may not be in the position to switch jobs right now, but that doesn't mean you can't open the door to start thinking about what other opportunities you might want to explore when the time arises. I'm going to keep us on track. Jess, this has been so helpful. We're going to do a quick Athena Spotlight, and then we're going to do Q&A because we got some fun questions coming in from the audience.
So many.
Okay. Very quick spotlight. Again, for anyone who's not familiar with Athena, we're a compliance training company. We do harassment prevention, cybersecurity, management training, all the good stuff. We actually have a training all about how to get your managers to stop putting their foot in their mouth. It's called our Manager Essentials training. If you are tired of your managers promising things that the company cannot promise, or asking people inappropriate questions in response to them revealing that they are expecting, or maybe they request reasonable accommodation and your managers just shut them down instead of looping in HR, or maybe they approve something without looping in HR. This is the training for you. Know that we are offering we offer special promotions for webinar attendees. We'll send an email out with resources on that following the call today. And we also have a case management tool and employee hotline where you can track employee relations issues as they come up, so that you've got everything centralized and you don't have to worry, if your HRBP changes and now, they had all the information in their head and there's no one who can track that information. Super, super helpful. If you're curious, again, we'll send out more details soon. For anyone who tuned in for HRCI or SHRM credit, here is your code now. Please take a look. I will, while that's going, Ace, in the background, can you put up our poll before we answer your questions? We'd love for you to answer a few questions for us. I'm going to be quiet for 10 seconds while you fill this out. Okay, and then before we jump into Q&A, I actually want to share one more thing. We get this a lot from employees where they basically say, like, or from HR professionals, like their biggest challenge is their relationship with their stakeholders and CEOs. So know that we will also be sharing resources on how to have more effective HRBP one-on-ones and how to more effectively partner with and negotiate with your CEO. For example, I'll just give one as like a teaser. Say that you propose something to your CEO and they just say no. How do you make no not be the end of the conversation? How do you say things instead, like, okay, is this no for now or no forever? What would it take to turn this no into a yes? Is it a budgetary thing? Oh, it's budget. Okay, well, what dollar amount do I have to get it down to for you to say yes, right? So we'll send out resources to make sure that you're having productive conversations with your CEOs and stakeholders. With that said, let's go ahead and ask some questions or answer some of your questions. Jess, I think you're going to appreciate this one. We had a lot of questions about metrics. What are some key metrics that help HR reflect their contributions to the success of the company?
Yeah, this is a great one. I think so. There are three types of metrics that I talk about. One is operational metrics, so things like, how many headcount do we have, how many days sick leave people using per year, what are, like, kind of status update metrics, right? And you want to send them to the board. You're looking at them in finance. It's the same as your management accounts. You want to know what's the status of where we're at. Those, I think it's the same ones you probably are looking at. It's like the very standard kind of portfolio of like headcount, error per head, sick days per function, whatever it is. Then you have what I call input metrics and output metrics, or success metrics. Input metrics are things like, deliver this by this date. Did you do it on time? Did you do it on budget? You already know what the solution is. You just need to implement it. Now, this tends to be what a lot of HR teams focus on in terms of their success. So I need to get this thing done. So I will have a goal of launch this thing by this date. But actually, what we really should be focusing on, I think, as much as possible, is output metrics, which are trying to affect a change somewhere. So we talked about the holiday knot, and someone asked in the chat, and I'm so sorry I forget your name, but what were the things we were focusing on trying to solve? And I said we were trying to solve ARR lost over summer and resourcing capacity. So being above 90% resourcing capacity over summer, whatever percentage it was, and have less than X amount of lost ARR based on, not having the amount of resource we needed to get back to people. And building solutions that are focused on solving problems doesn't always mean that you're going to have HR metrics. Sometimes it might be like that example, kind of an operations metric or even a revenue metric. So I think, really think about what problem your business is trying to solve, and then you can think about a HR focused solution or input metric. And I always tell my team to think about ELTV to CAC, which I'm not going to talk about a bunch. I can put a little blog in the chat and people can read about it. But employee lifetime value to CAC payback ratio, I think, is a really interesting metric to look at more holistically.
We have a question that I think is like maybe like an add-on to this. I'm going to share my opinion, then I'm curious to hear if you disagree. And then I think we'll have time for one more question. We have someone in the comments who has anonymously asked, how do you keep up your motivation when multiple initiatives have stalled or been met with low energy? And I have a pretty strong take here. And so I'm curious.
Go, I'd love to hear.
Okay, so I think that anytime you are rolling out an initiative and you're getting a lot of pushback or people aren't doing the thing, I think that the chances are very high that you are trying to solve with the wrong problem and that you need to take a step back and reassess. And I'll give an example. At Athena, we were doing this like we were doing like these new values highlights, highlight an employee every month. And the leadership was not filling out this one thing that we were doing as a part of that. And I could have just forced them and been like, hey, you guys didn't do this. Why are you missing the deadline? I'm going to chase you down until you get it done. But instead, I said, okay, I feel like there's not buy-in right now. We're going to skip it this time, but I'm going to ask for feedback. And I had the CEO and our CTO, our two co-founders, ask their direct reports why they didn't do the thing. And I had no idea there were all these underlying issues, be it like time concerns. They didn't think it was like a motivational thing. They felt like they needed more structure. They just didn't like the idea, and I would never have known that had I just like made them do it. And so I'm curious though, just like, what's your take? Like, do you think maybe I have too myopic a view here?
I don't think of you as too myopic. I think so. I guess I've got a take on this, which I think has been born out of periods of a lot of frustration about this exact problem, and then also peace, maybe too much peace at certain times. I'd love to see the little emojis and hearts. Is anyone heard of, read Denny Meyer's book, Setting the Table? It's about hospitality, so it's a very different world, but I love stealing from other worlds and turning it into my own space. So Denny Meyer he is the owner of Shake Shack, but also a Union Square Hospitality Group. Very, very successful restaurateur and entrepreneur. He wrote this book called Setting the Table, which is really about how to work with hospitality. And there's a really interesting story in his book that I love, which is when he was studying to be a waiter at a kind of white cloth table restaurant, his mentor said to him, I want you to go and set that table and move everything to where it should be. So he went over and Danny set the whole table. And then his mentor, Pat, I think was his name, walked over and moved everything around, moved the salt shakers out of place and was like, okay, reset the table. So Danny reset the table. And then he does it again and he resets the table. And then he does it again. It's like, where do you want everything to be? And he's like, puts everything back. And he's like, what are you doing, man? Like, you keep messing this up. And like, what are you trying to teach me? And then his mentor basically said to him, like, this is what your job is. People, your staff, your guests, they're always going to be moving the table off center. That's their job. That's what they're going to be doing. That's the reason you're here. Until you understand and get comfortable with the fact that your job is to not get upset, it's to understand, it's to think about the new problems, it's to think about what's changed and move everything back to where it was, like, you will never find peace, right? I think it's the idea that like the law of entropy is existing around more than just HR. And you are a person trying to achieve something the same as everyone else. And until you achieve peace with the fact that everything's breaking everywhere all at once, all the time, you're going to have a really tough time. And the day when there's nothing left to fix and there's nothing left to do, I think we all kind of like slightly dream of it. But I think if the day really came, we'd probably be a little disappointed.
Disagree with you. I can't disagree with you. I think we sort of like thrive in a little bit of chaos and we like solving these problems. I think the challenge then is like finding that balance, right? And what is the right amount of chaos and feeling valued and
yes, completely.
Right. And then like making incremental progress forward. Oh, we're at time. I want to be respectful of anyone who has a meeting right after this. Jess, thank you so much for this conversation.
Enjoy.
Such a pleasure. Everyone, if you've got questions, things we didn't cover, ACE is sharing a feedback survey. Fill it out. Let us know what future topics you'd like to see us cover. Keep an eye out for those follow-up emails with those resources. We'll also share information on Jess's book, so you can all check it out. Thank you all, and I will see you around. Happy Tuesday, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.